All right. So this next little, once you thought everything was easy to this point, right? So this next little bit's kind of the meatier portion, and we're going to talk about who has to get a 1099 and what exceptions there are. So here's, I guess you can say, the part where you have to concentrate the most on, right? No, not that you didn't have to concentrate on the rest, but if we say we're going to start with generalities again, because we try to, paint it in the broadest stroke we can, and then we get into some of the details, and we say generally. So this isn't going to work for everything, but say generally. It's for if you're in a trade or a business. So what I mean by that, if you're just the average Joe and you hire, or maybe you pay your neighbor to paint your house for you, you're not going to have to give a 1099 to your neighbor because that isn't your course of business. Unless, if it really truly was, if you have an office building and you hire somebody to paint your office building, well, that's related to your business. If it's over $600, that's one of our other generic thresholds for the most part. Whether it's over $600 for the year, you're going to provide somebody a 1099. And if they're not a corporation. So right away we see, hey, we have an exception to that rule. If somebody's a corporation, we don't have to give them a 1099. That's kind of nice. So again, we have exceptions to that. We're going to start getting into those exceptions, but just the broadest stroke, we say, most of these 1099s we're issuing out are for contractors. If it's in your trade or business, you pay them more than $600 and they're not a corporation, likely you're going to have to give them a 1099. So now that we get into the fun of all the details of that, right? So what about exceptions to the corporation where we say, nope, it doesn't matter. Even if they're a corporation, in this case, you're going to have to give this person a 1099. Well, believe it or not, lawyers, they don't seem to trust. The IRS doesn't trust them at all. So they have a big exception. They said, I don't care if you're a corporation. Lawyers, if they are reported in Box 7 of a 1099 miscellaneous or Box 14, no exceptions for them if they're a corporation. We want to know about all the lawyer payments. If it's a medical or health payment, so that's Box 6 of the 1099 miscellaneous. And don't worry too much about memorizing these box numbers. As we get into part 2 of the course, we're going to actually do a section about 1099 miscellaneous and how all those boxes relate. So don't worry too much yet. We're just talking about exceptions. If somebody's a corporation and they get a payment for medical or health payments, doesn't matter. Even if they're a corporation, they're going to need to get that. If they do broker and barter transactions, well, here's going to be exceptions there. So these are ones where the corporation exception doesn't apply. Cancellation of debt income, those 1099-Cs. If you ever would take out any federal withholding, then it doesn't matter dollar amount or corporation or what, you're going to need to create a 1099 because otherwise they won't know how much has been taken out. Or if there's foreign taxes paid, got to do one anyway. Doesn't matter the dollar amount. Fish purchases. This is one of those weird little exceptions. If it's Box 7, but it's purchases of fish, then that's going to be reported no matter if it's a different entity. And merchant card and third-party payments, again, doesn't matter if there's a corporation. The 1099-Ks get to go out to everybody that has a merchant account. So these are some common exceptions to those. Additionally, we have dollar exceptions. So these are ones where that $600 rule just doesn't really apply. So if they happen to have interest, they need a 1099 interest statement. This one is over or just a $10 amount. So we can't wait until they reach $600, $10 that amount. So sometimes this helps because if you're preparing a return and somebody's like, well, I made $2 of interest from my credit union. Well, you're not going to get a 1099. That's one of the things I can assure my client because they're going, well, I got one last year, but I can't find my 1099. Well, it's because they're not going to send it out unless it's over $10. The same thing for dividends, 1099 DIV, it's over $10 again, but this is one of those where we say it's an exception to our generic $600 rule. Any retirement income payments, the 1099-Rs, those get reported, kind of doesn't really matter on that dollar threshold. Somebody who gets a distribution from a cooperative, that 1099 PATR, or if they have royalties, that's Box 2 of the 1099 miscellaneous. Here's ones where that dollar exception doesn't follow the $600 rule. Of course, by the time we're done, you're going to say, is that really even a generic rule? Because there's all these exceptions to it. So if we say, here's some dollar exceptions that it doesn't matter if at that $10 amount anymore, it's just anything. They don't care if it's a dollar, that you're going to have to do a 1099. And some of those are if there's an abandonment of property, a 1099A, anything for the broker and barter transaction. So we said earlier there was an exception for that if it's a corporation. Now there's any dollar amount. So pretty much if there's a reason to send out a 1099B, doesn't matter if it's a corporation or what the dollar amount is, then it needs to go out. Healthcare advance payments, those 1099H forms, relatively new in the overall scheme of our 1099 reporting. Those, any dollar amount, those are going to be reported. Long-term care, 1099 is the 1099 LTC. 529 plans, the HSAs or MSA plans, so those are respectively 1099Q, 1099SA. And again, those fish purchases, they don't care dollar amount, they don't care if it's a corporation, they want to know about all those fish purchases. So that's one that they want to know everything about. So these are all the dollar an exception where they don't even have to hit that $10 mark. They just want it to anything. And what it is, I think on that fishing one is payments to fishing crews. They want to know or trace that because that's one of the areas I guess they have found it in the past were underreported, and they were trying to head that off of the past. So that's one of the reasons it has any dollar amount. So going back to that lovely general rule, if we say, well, in reality, the $600 rule that we think about really only applies to a variety of just limited forms. Cancellation of debt, well, that one actually follows the $600 rule. 1099 miscellaneous, and I have to say most of the form anyway, because there's various boxes of the form that hit those other exceptions we talked about a couple slides ago. 1099S, so certain real estate transactions, it'll go ahead and follow that $600 rule. And that's where I was kind of, commenting that with so many exceptions, does it really mean it's the general rule anymore? And it's because the most common one that we think of, that 1099 miscellaneous, box 7, as we pay our independent contractors, because that's the majority of what most all of us have to deal with in 1099s and think about when we say 1099, that's instantly what pops into somebody's mind. 1099 miscellaneous, box 7. That one does follow $600 for that particular box. So because it's so common, that's just kind of what comes to mind. And it's just because that's the one we associate the most with 1099 reporting to begin with. As we look at a little bit more, and this gets into that employee versus independent contractor, but just it's worthy, at least in this class, to note, employees should not ever get 1099 forms. 1099 reporting is intended for reporting amounts paid to non-employees. So what happens if the employee gets a bonus? Well, it should be actually reported properly through W-2s. It should be done differently. There should not be an occasion, and this is actually going to prompt them to ask questions if you have somebody who has a W-2 and a 1099 in the same year. So this is just kind of that cautionary word of, you should watch for this, but employees should not have an occasion where they get a 1099. If you get bonuses, if they get gifts, this is not a reason to give them a 1099. It should be worked properly through their W-2. If they get per diem payments, they get mileage reimbursements. If you're doing it properly through an accountable plan, there should not be an occasion to have to do this anyway. If they're getting commissions, gift cards, it is basically, these are all occasions that sometimes, if you're not watching that, it may be tempting to give them a 1099, but really it has to be done properly on the W-2 at the end of the year, reported that way, appropriate withholding done on most of that income. And unfortunately, a lot of businesses, it's common they may give these gifts, bonuses, commissions, etc., and not account for them on the W-2 form, sometimes accidentally, but the temptation is the employer is going to go, well, I can just solve that by issuing a 1099. So here's some areas just to kind of watch for, and that's why I put it in here, because that wouldn't be the case. If you're doing things reimbursement-wise, it shouldn't be reported on a W-2 or 1099 form if it's being done properly. Now, there are, again, when we talk about this, like so many exceptions always, right? So what happens about certain types of employees? There are statutory exceptions to this. Directors, if you're on a board of directors for an organization, statutorily, means by law, those are required to be reported on 1099 miscellaneous. And you said, well, wait a second, you just said it's not good to have a W-2 and a 1099 in the same year. And yes, that's true. Because you may have somebody who's acting on a board of directors, which by law says they're to get a 1099 for any fees paid for that, and maybe they're also an employee. So that will be an occasion where it is truly an exception. So just be aware of that that's going to be one of those that it's going to make you nervous because you're like, well, wait, I shouldn't have. No, this is by law. You're supposed to for director's fees. So that's one that is kind of outside of that box. Director's fees are required to be put on that 1099 miscellaneous. There are a few other obscure exceptions that can occur, so be aware of those as well. We do cover a lot of those examples in a case study in part 3 of the course. So if this is something that's intriguing you and you're like, hey, I'm kind of wanting more, do keep following through the rest of this because we'll continue to give you more and more information to help supplement this. But for the most part, if from this course you take away, I shouldn't have a 1099 and W-2 for the same person in the same year, then you're gonna be okay most all the time.